Excellent. Hello world, Podler team is back at it again. I am Naiji Coach. I'm joined by Naiji, Ben, and Glenn, and we're working on some more track 2 stuff. So we're closing in on their L5, which for this point, the curriculum for them is the human design, and they're in the last leg of it, the social alchemy. All right, so we were talking about change flow. So basically what you want to do is answer this sentence for all 4 waves, which is, what function does it serve in the overall process of change flow? So Ben, do you want to go ahead and read them out? You've been reading the...
Oh, sure thing.
Cool.
So the way I want to do this is basically just attach the after the first sentence, attach the rest of that paragraph to each corresponding wave. So the first wave, the second wave, third wave, fourth wave.
Yes,
okay,
correct.
that makes sense. So the mojos in the first wave discover and self-generate new ideas and live by them out or translate them in order to show what one could potentially do with the idea so it can be picked up by others. The mojos in the second wave build onto or play with a blueprinted or experimented idea in order to see if the idea is feasible or feasible for further usage. If it is, they become engaged in the process of giving the idea physical form or ameliorating an existing form into something better. The mojos in the third wave become interested in a prototype if they see that it has already been proven to work, at least to some small degree, so they can test drive and promote it. The mojos in the fourth wave are interested in products that have been proven to be stable and well received so that they can trust in it and focus on convincing others of its proven merits and establishing proper standards. So the mojos in the first wave are all about generating new ideas, and they live out those ideas so that can be useful for humanity to know where some good directions might be to go on something. The second wave is more focused on taking those ideas and basically playing with them, see if and blueprints and playing with them, seeing if more can be expanded on them, more can be materialized with them if they like them, and basically making them more material, but it's still within the realm of experimentation. Wave 3 focuses more on prototyping, such that an idea has already been given a significant degree of material form, but they're still test driving, they're still working things out. It's not super well established.
Just one slight shade there is actually prototyping is often associated, I think, with wave 2, and test driving is wave 3.
Okay, I thought that I saw prototyping mentioned in wave 3.
My bad, my bad.
If they become, it says if they become interested in a prototype. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, maybe that was my bad for making it seem like, but the way I meant that is like, say, they become interested in a prototype and they see that it has already been proven. So the prototype is actually the wave 2.
That makes sense.
Yes, here, an initial prototype in the first sentence of wave 2. Transferring initial ideas. Initial ideas is like wave 1. Transferring initial ideas into a prototype is wave 2.
Okay. Yeah, I've just been looking at the second sentence for those paragraphs. But there's some useful material in the first sentence. It seems like the first sentence still is useful. It's just oftentimes it's a compound sentence, or it's a sentence with a clause at the end.
Gotcha. Yeah, the clause is helpful.
But that makes more sense. I can do it again. I think that might be. I have a better understanding.
The prototyping thing is kind of important. Like, it's a thread that goes through.
Okay. So the first wave is all focused on generating new ideas and basically materializing abstract ideas. So basically just laying out those ideas onto Blueprint and just presenting what those ideas are in a way in which they can be understood by others. That's the primary focus of wave 1. Wave 2 is more focused on prototyping those ideas, giving those ideas more material form, but it's still largely very experimental. Wave 3 is focused on test driving. Those ideas are generally quite solidified at that point, but they're not fully solidified. There's still some kinks to work out, still some things to fix up and work on. Wave 4 is primarily focused on taking ideas that are already well established and have a great deal of form, but to establish standards of excellence and spread those existing ideas so that humanity knows what the best stuff is.
Indeed. And I was throwing there also, it's not in the book, but throwing there also, because I may sound more in the Vi, although it is for both of them. But V also has that connoisseur experience. It likes the good stuff. And so there has to be like a known of what is the good stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Glenn?
Yeah, just a moment.
Is there like a discernment flow that corresponds with, I mean, it doesn't really correspond with change flow, but basically has a similar mathematical relationship, if that makes sense? So like Jez to says, is there like,
Yeah, I think
I'm not sure what that would look like. I mean, it wouldn't be change because that's more like Nez to Vez, but
yeah, I think there is. I've been trying to over the years figure exactly what that would be, and I think there's gonna be a lot of different applications, just like change flow. It's gonna be very big once the concept is fully understood. But conceptually, I think it has something to do with tipping points of decision making, a spectrum.
Right.
And if a person starts logical or values-based, basically there's a full spectrum of agreeing to something. So starting from a position of disagreeing or neutral, and then moving them emotionally over tipping point into their logical agreement, or through their logical agreement, getting agreement on that and tipping that over until you get to the other side and to get full agreement by getting their values based as well. I think something to do with that, but I'm still pondering.
That's interesting.
All right. I think I want to try to do this one here.
Sure.
All right. So when it comes to the first wave, this is essentially when the emojis that make it up are trying to basically come up with ideas. It's associated with coming up with ideas, generating new ideas, and then putting them into some kind of a blueprint kind of a format so that people can have access to it, so that they're able to be able to look into it, read into it, and sort of like understand. And it has a lot to do with basically getting the word out, as far as like it's something that is something that can be talked about. It's something that can be discussed, and then the conversation can then go from there. And usually from there, it goes into the second wave, which has a lot to do with taking those ideas, which are mostly abstract and mostly theoretical and mostly conceptual, and then taking them and putting them into some kind of a form, into some kind of a prototype form, which can then mean sort of like coming up with some kind of like a technology or some kind of like a method, or like any kind of like for example, Podlair is, we have the Rosetta Stone of the human soul, and so now we're taking going into the prototyping form, which has a lot to do with like the sample surfer program. That's sort of like one way to see it. It's sort of like we're taking that kind of technology and we're using it to sort of like make something that will teach people these sorts of ideas, but it's still kind of like we're still working out the kinks and stuff like that. And then third wave has a lot to do with once that's sort of like been done to like pretty much to like a significant degree, once we've got the beta testing kind of stuff out of the way, we can then start to, we'll have the prototype, and then we can start mass producing it. We can start taking it and like having, like more of it. And then, I mean, maybe in the case of like a program, it might not necessarily, be that way, but definitely we have plans as far as like incorporating more and more stuff into it, and then making it even more applicable to a more wider audience. And that's a lot what the third wave has to do with, which has to do with accessibility and making it much more readily accessible to the masses, basically. And then finally, fourth wave has a lot to do with,
well, just on that is the fourth wave actually does get a bit of that, making it for the masses, which is like the high grade stuff and standards of excellence. And beta testing can sometimes be associated with wave 3, which is they didn't think the game up. That's wave 1. They didn't make the prototype of the game a playable version of the idea. Wave 2. Wave 3 is they actually are the first like
they're like the intermediary between like mass audience and the beta testers.
Exactly.
Right. So it's like more what do you call it?
Or I should say the people who were testing it while working on the project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's becoming more popular, but it's not necessarily like global yet, is what we're talking about here. Yeah, okay. And then fourth wave has a lot to do with like its standards of excellence. It's kind of being brought into it. People, it's kind of like become a thing. It's become something that people talk about all over the world, basically, or at least, like majority of the world knows about it. And there's all kinds of like I don't know, like legalities and stuff like that kind of get mixed into it as well, as far as like how things are done and
Official.
that sort of thing.
But
Making it more official, basically. Yeah, exactly. That's the word. Making it more official, making it more professional, making it more like in like what comes up is sort of like Microsoft and like any kind of business that starts up like that. It started off small and then it became bigger, and then eventually it's kind of like become a thing, well renowned, and there's all kinds of like institutions, other kinds of connections that are being made to that thing, and then people are relying on it over several years. Like, you know, schools and stuff, they have these programs that run Microsoft and blah 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 and blah. And so yeah, that's basically what fourth wave has to do with, which is like that really like long term kind of stuff, and it's kind of like become a secure entity in the environment.
and also related the V to that part of the equation as well. You did in general, but also I not like you did kind of focus on the Vi. But there's also that the V knows it's going to get a good rush. Like if it sees that packaging with that label and that fourth wave say Vi stamp approval, the V corresponds at that channel in that it's like. Oh, I got to go get me some Tic Tacs. Oh, I got to go get me a Twinkie, or I got to go get me this spinning machine, or it's like a known that's going to be a good time.
Right.
A
Yeah.
guaranteed good time.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like a brand loyalty is kind of like where that kind of gets into it, right? Because people know that
Budweiser,
they
not
can
my
they
thing,
can
but yeah.
yeah, they can expect a certain kind of experience when they buy that particular product, like Nike, for example. Like like yeah. Okay, yeah. So the V definitely gets into it as well.
Yeah.
And there's trust that's also
Yeah.
implied there as well,
Yeah.
which is that, people know the brand, they've seen the brand rise up, and they've, bought multiple packagings of whatever it is that they sell, and they kind of like have developed themselves as a name, and so
A taste.
people,
Right there. That's number two. They build up a taste.
yeah,
V
yeah,
that's its kind of special like literalness is that it's sort of hands on, but it does. It has a palate. It likes that product on its a palate for it.
yeah, exactly. Awesome.
Cool. All right, boom. Well done. Let's get into the next one. Glenn, you'll take lead. Here it is. What are the discernment quartets? What are the 4 different discernment quartet groups? And what mojo designs are in each one? So you can do, these are pretty mathematical. So if you want, you can do it off the cuff, or you can read it through first.
Okay, so this is the priority quartet?
Discernment?
Or the discernment quartet. Hold on, let me see if I can find that.
In the book, it has.
Oh, you're right. You're right. It is priority first. Okay. Cool. All right. So basically the same thing with priorities. You'll take that one, Glenn. What is the priority quartet? What are the 4 groups, and who are in those groups?
All right, cool. All right, so the priority quartet, I'll read it out first, is the social alchemy grouping where each group is comprised of the 4 mojos that all share having a source power that addresses the same priority in the psyche. So the hunter mojos are the Naiji, Naizi, Vaiji, and Vaizi, which are the only 4 mojos that have a worldview map as their source power. The gather mojos are the Nijai, Nizai, Vijai, and Vizai, which are the only 4 mojos that have a stimulus register power as their source power. The pilot mojos, which are the Ji Nai, the Ji Vi, the Z Nai, and the Z Vi, which are the only 4 mojos that have a dynamics mover power as their source power. And the tower mojos are the Jai Ni, the Jai Vi, the Zai V, no, Jai Ni and Jai Vi, and then Zai Ni, and then Zai Vi, which are the only 4 mojos that have a compass bearing power as their source power. All right.
Cool.
Okay, so that's basically it. And then,
when you're ready.
all right.
Yeah, the rest of these beats, most of them are pretty mathematical.
Okay, so the priority quartets are all the mojos that make up that fall under a particular grouping where they have a particular quadrant of the psyche as their source power, and is what leads off the entire peak pathway for them. So this is, so as far as the mojos that make them up, we'll get into that. As far as like, okay, the first one we can say is the Hunter mojos, and these are all mojos that have a worldview map as their source power, and the group is comprised of the Naiji, Naizi, Vaiji, and Vaizi. Then there's also the Gatherer powers, which have the Gatherer mojos, which are the mojos that have the stimulus register power as their source power, and they are the Nijai, Nizai, Vijai, and Vizai. The pilot mojos are next, and they're the mojos that have the dynamics mover power, or is the left on the left side here. Is they have that power as their source power, so they are the Jinai, the Jivai, the Zinai, and the Zivai. And then lastly, the Tower mojos, they all have their source power being in the right rear quadrant, which is the compass bearings power, and that one is, and then the mojos that make that up are the Jaini, the Jaivi, the Zaini, and the Zaivi.
Got it.
Kind of all over the place there, but I got it.
You got it.
Right now it's Ben's turn.
Cool. So the priority quartet is comprised of the 4 mojos that have as their source power a power that addresses the same priority in Psyche. So the Hunter mojos are the Naiji, Naizi, Vaiji, and Vaizi. The Gatherer mojos are the Bijai, Vijai, Vizai, and Nizai. The Pilot mojos are the Jinai, Zinai, Jivai, and Zivai. And the Tower mojos are the Jaivi, Jaini, Zaini, Zaivi.
Got it. All right, then Ben, you'll take lead in this next one. What are the discernment quartets? What are the 4 different groups? And which mojo designs are in each group?
Okay. So, all right. I think I'm just going to read this a little bit and then kind of do it off the cuff, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the discernment quartet is comprised of the 4 mojos that have the same discernment power as their momentum discernment power. So you have the Ji mojos, which are the Naiji, Vaiji, Jinai, and Jivai. You have the Jai mojos, which are the Jaini, Vijai, Jaivi, and Nijai. You have the Z mojos, which are the Naizi, the Zinai, the Vaizi, and the Zivai. And you have the Zai mojos, which are the Nizai, Zaini, Zaivi, and Vizai. I think I did that right. I
think you did. You got all 4.
Yeah, I'm just like wondering, was there a time where I mixed up like Jai mojos and Zai mojos? But I don't think I did. I thought
no, I think they probably sound similar in your tongue.
Yeah, and I just did the priority quartet, so that's probably why I'm thinking. I'm getting those mixed up in my head. Like,
Glenn?
All right, just a moment. So we're covering the discernment mojos, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Discernment quartets.
Yeah. All right, so the discernment quartets is all the mojos that happen to share the same discernment. So like Ji, Jai, Z, and Zai, they all share those powers as being one of their top 2 powers. So the quartet for Ji would include the Naiji, the Vaiji, the Jinai, and the Jivai. The Z quartet would include the Zinai, the Zivai, the Vaizi, and the Vaiji.
Yeah.
Or not the Vaiji, the Naizi. And then the Jai quartet would include the Jaini, the Jaivi, the Nijai, and the Vijai. And the Zai quartet would include the Zaini, the Zaivi, the Nizai, and the Vizai.
Good. All right. Then you'll take lead in the next one. Same thing for perception. What are the perception quartets? What are the 4 groups and who's in them?
right, so the perception quartets refers to the social alchemy set of groupings where each group is comprised of the 4 mojos that all share having the same perception power as their momentum perception. So we have the Nai mojos quartet, which is comprised of the Nai Ji, Nai Z, Ji Nai, and Z Nai, which are the only 4 mojos that all share having Nai as their momentum perception. The Ni mojos quartet, which comprises the Ni Jai, Ni Zai, Jai Ni, and Zai Ni, which are the only 4 mojos that share having a Ni as their momentum perception. The Vi mojo quartet, which is comprised of the Vi Ji, Vi Z, Ji Vi. You know what? I'm just gonna do this all. Just.
I thought, I thought some of these is pretty mathematical.
Yeah. Okay. So the perception quartet, I'll just, I'm not reading it this time. I'm just going off in my head. So the perception quartet is made up of mojos that fill up a particular quartet grouping. So that's a group of 4 that all share having the same perception power as their as one of their momentum powers. So this includes Ni, Vi, Nai, and Vi. So all mojos will share having one of those powers as their top 2, as either their source or their tandem. So the Nai grouping would include the Nai Ji, the Nai Z, the Z Nai, and the Ji Nai. The Vi grouping would include the Vi Ji, the Vi Z, the Z Vi, and the Ji Vi. The Ni grouping would include the Ni Jai, Ni Zai, Zai Ni, and Jai Ni. What is it? The Nai Ni Vi The V grouping would include the Jai Ni, or the Jai V, the Zai V, the V Zai, and the V Jai.
Good. Ben?
All right. So the perception quartets are made up of all of the mojos that have the same power as their momentum perception power. So you have the Nai mojos, you have the Nai mojos, which are the Nai Ji, Ji Nai, Z Nai, and Nai Z. You have the Ni mojos, which are the Jai Ni, Ni Jai, Ni Zai, and Zai Ni. You have the Vi mojos, which are the Z Vi, Vi Z, Vi Ji, and Ji Vi. You have the V mojos, which are the Jai V, V Jai, V Zai, and Zai V.
Got it. All right, so Ben, take lead on this next one. It is Shades of Consciousness. Again, you can read from the book, or you can just go off the ways. Good.
Okay. So the Shades of Consciousness quartet is comprised of all of the mojos that have the 4 same conscious powers, but in different orders. So you have the Nai Ji Zai V quartet, which is made up of the Nai Ji, Ji Nai, Zai V, and V Zai. You have the Nai Z Jai V quartet, which is made up of the Nai Z, Z Nai, Jai V, and V Jai. You have the Ni Jai Z Vi quartet, which is made up of the Ni Jai, Z Vi, Vi Z, and Jai Ni. And you have the Ni Zai Ji Vi quartet, which is made up of the Ni Zai, Zai Ni, Vi Ji, and Ji Vi.
Good. Glenn?
All right, so the Shades of Consciousness quartet includes all the mojos that happen to have all the same 4 powers, but in different rankings. So there's only 4 different possible mojos that could be as far as Shades of Consciousness. So that's why it's a quartet. So the first one is all the mojos that have the powers of Nai, Ji, Zai, and V as their conscious powers. So that would include the Nai Ji, the Ji Nai, the Zai V, and the V Zai. There's also the Nai Z Jai V quartet, which includes the Nai Z, the Z Nai, the Jai V, and the V Jai. Then there's the Ni Jai Z Vi quartet, which includes the Ni Jai, the Jai Ni, the Z Vi, and the Vi Z. And then lastly, there's the Ni Zai Ji Vi quartet, which includes the Ni Zai, the Zai Ni, the Ji Vi, and the Vi Ji.
Got it.
It's nice how the powers are all arranged as the Nez Alpha in terms of like how they're presented on the page. In terms of, it makes it easier to remember, I guess.
You can actually remember it. The funny thing is, you can actually find your place in the quartet and start all the quartets from there.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That memory device will work for anyone.
Yeah, because I mean, you could do it for like any. You could arrange these any way you want. Like you could start with Vijay Z9 and like arrange them all based on the Bez alpha if you want. And sort of like do from
That's
there if you
cool.
want.
All right. So let's see here. That's going to be you, Glenn. What are polar opposites? What are composition opposites?
Polar opposites, and what are their the composites? So, all right.
What are polar opposites? What are composition opposites?
Oh, composition opposites. All right. So just not going into the mojos, just explaining what that is.
I believe so. Let me see. Let me get the part of the book.
Yeah, the book doesn't break them down. It looks like.
Ah, okay. Let me see here. I see two sentences here in the bottom of page 71.
Yep.
That's all I'm asking for.
Okay. Compositional opposite, which is the other mojo design that also has the same ranking of priorities, but with a different power for each priority. So for the Naiji, what would that be?
I think the Vizai.
Vizai is the polar opposite, and the composition opposite is a Vi-Z.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got you. All right, so we don't need to get into any of that. All right. Composition opposite.
Basically, the polar opposite is your opposite. Your composition opposite is the opposite of your other.
That makes sense.
Or your entire peak pathway opposite, in a way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out how to word that as far as explaining it. So the same rank of priorities, but with a different power for each. Right, okay, yeah. That makes sense. So, all right, so polar opposite has to do with, I'm just going to do the beat, not explain, not read it, I mean. So polar opposite has to do with any mojo, so it always comes in groups of two, basically. So there's the mojo, and then there's the opposite mojo. So, and either one can be the reference and then the opposite. So for the Naiji, for example, it's going to be the Vizai because they both share the same conscious powers, but they share the exact same powers in completely different hierarchies. So for the Naiji, their Nai and their Ji is their first and second, and then Zai and V is their third and fourth. But whereas for the Vizai, it's going to be their V being first, their Zai being second, their Ji being third, and their Nai being fourth. So they have the same powers, but completely reversed as far as conscious peak pathway goes. The compositional opposites is the same kind of principle in essence, but it has to do with the complete opposites as far as the entire peak pathway from your source power all the way to your unconscious polar power. So they will fall into the same category as far as quadrant being the dominant quadrant, but they'll share none of the actual same powers themselves. So for the Naiji, that would be the Vi-Z. They don't have Nai as their source power, and they don't have Ji as their tandem power, nor do they have Zai and V as their third and fourth rank power. All those powers are completely different. So it's going to be Vi-Z, Jai, and Ni as their conscious four powers, and which then go into Vijay, Zivai. Vijay, Z, Nai. Yeah.
All right. Zivai, we talking about, I'm sorry, what was the last part you said? Because
Z-Nai.
For who?
The Vi. Oh no, never mind. The G-Nai. That's what's going to be for the Vi-Z. Right.
I'm sorry, I lost. I already gave you credit, and then you said some more stuff, and I didn't quite catch that stuff. What exactly was it you said? I didn't get this last part here.
For the Vi-Z, their unconscious powers are going to go in the order of V, Zai, G, no, V, Zai, G, and then Nai. Yeah. I think I may have messed up on the some of the powers of saying Ni or V or something like that. But I think the order is V, Xi, Ji, Nai, right? For their unconscious hierarchy,
Yes.
for the Vaisi.
Yeah, I may have said it right the first time. I actually, like I said, I already gave you credit, and then you said some more stuff. So
No, I think I may have said it incorrectly the first few times, but then I just got it now, and so that's good.
okay, all right. So then Ben.
Okay, so the polar opposite is going to be the mojo with the exact same four conscious powers, but in reverse order. So for example, the Naiji has the polar opposite of V Xi. The composition opposite is going to be the mojo that doesn't have four powers that you do not, but is also of the same, within the same priority quartet. So for example, for Naiji, that would be the Vaisi, because they're the hunter that has the four powers that you do not. So I guess that's another mathematical way to think about it.
I wish I said it as concisely as you.
That's good. Yeah, the way it helps me always kind of think of it is just kind of associating the polar opposite with being like the most modulation mojo to you for your conscious powers, and then the composition is the same thing for your other. Yeah, there's lots of ways to come at though. All right. Next up then is going to be you, Ben. What are the adaptive directive octets? Which mojo designs are directive and why? Which mojo designs are adaptive and why?
Okay. Okay, so the adaptive directive octets refers to the 8 mojos that have the same the same adaptive directive dichotomy, so being either adaptive or directive. So the directives are the Jinai, Naiji, Jivai, Vaiji, Zinai, Naizi, Zivi, and Vizi. The adaptives are
and what makes them all directive? What do they all share?
They all share their top 2 powers being directive powers.
Good.
The adaptive mojos are the Vijai, Jivi, Nijai, Jaini, Nizai, Zaini, Zivi, Vizai, and those all share having their momentum powers being adaptive powers.
Good. Glenn?
All right, so the adaptive directive octet is next, and so these are all made up of 8 mojos each, where the difference is between the energy fields of directive and adaptive. So the directive octet has all mojos that basically have their top 2 powers being directive, and then the adaptive mojos are all the ones that, or the adaptive octet includes all mojos that have their top 2 powers being adaptive. So for the directives, it's going to include the Naiji, the Jinai, the Naizi, the Zinai, the Vaiji, the Jivai, the Vizi, and the Zivi. For the adaptives, it's going to include the Nijai, the Jaini, the Nizai, the Zaini, the Vijai, the Jivi, the Vizai, and the Zivi.
Good. All righty. So you can go ahead and do the same thing. Glenn.
Objective and subjective.
Yep. So.
All right. So for the objective and subjective octets, these are all mojos that have the energy fields of either being objective or subjective. So the objective octet is going to include all mojos that have an objective power as their source power, whereas the subjective octet is going to have all mojos that have a subjective power as their source power. So the objective octet includes the Nijai, the Jinai, the Nizai, the Zinai, the Vijai, the Jivai, the Vizai, and the Zivi. The adaptive, the subjective octet is going to include all the mojos, which are the Naiji, the Zivi, the Jaini, the Vizi, the Vaiji, the Zaini, the what's the last one there? Did I say Xi
No,
V?
you didn't. There you go.
All right, I think I already did say that. So the Phi Z, no,
I think.
Ni Z and Xi V. There you go.
Okay. Interesting. I was curious, how are you pairing those up in your mind? It seemed like most of you were going with alphas, but then some of them you were doing like shades of consciousness or something.
I think I was doing shades of consciousness.
I
just kind of like
track what you're doing. Like I was like, that's a tricky way to go about.
Yeah. Sometimes I just completely
Yeah.
I completely change like the math I'm using like halfway through. It's like just whatever comes to me immediately is like the mathematical relationship I go with.
All right, go ahead.
All right.
That's awesome.
All right, so the objective-subjective octets refers to the 8 mojos that share the same energy field of being either objective or subjective. So the objective mojos are the Zni, Jni, Nijai, Vijai, Vizai, Nizai, Jivai, Zivai, and those all have an objective power as their source power. The subjective mojos are the Naiji, Vaiji, Jaivi, Zaivi, the Jaini, Zaini, and the Naizi, Vaizi, and those all have a subjective power as their source power.
Cool.
Yeah, you're right, Coach. It would have been easier if I went with the same source with the.
Yeah. You guys the other way. Myself, I tend to actually pick one math and just go all the way through because then it's easier to remember. But you guys, I noticed a couple times, you for like the 4 quartets, you'll do one math for 2 of them and then different math for the other.
It's funny how it's funny how the mental math of this works, because I noticed like with mathematics, like the way you do mathematics in your head is oftentimes like completely different from the way you do it on paper. Like the relationships that are easiest for you are oftentimes very from what is clearly laid out. So it's quite interesting. You know, it'll be interesting to see like what's more natural for humans to do as they're learning the material.
Yeah. No, I was doing myself because I was actually like trying to like track what you guys are doing.
And it's also cool like how these relationships, we naturally use them even though we're not necessarily directly thinking about the relationships themselves. They just naturally come to us to think about them that way.
Yeah, but like I said, as long as you get them all, but I think you kind of have to like go either in a strict sequence, or do 2 and 2? I think you guys just did that organically.
Yeah, I do 2 and 2 a
or
lot.
totally random, because otherwise I don't think you can't like mix the groups or it'll get confusing.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
But it's funny you guys both did that. That feels natural. I'm curious what that signifies.
It was interesting, yeah, because I started out with I think the NES pilots, and then I came back to at the end when I was doing the objectives. I started with the NES pilots, and then I ended with the VES pilots, and I did like the gatherers in between. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
For me,
go ahead. You're saying?
For me, the reason why I went in the method that I did is sort of like I know that I know this stuff, so I'm just gonna go off the hip kind of, just go with whatever that comes up in my head almost, and that sort of somewhat follows a logic to it, but maybe not. So I'll just kind of like I want to show off and get the beat done quickly, and so yeah, that kind of thing.
May have been some showing off in that sometimes when you know something really well, you want to put some spin on the fundamentals. Because you guys basically both did a strict math in that the 2 + 2 equals it, but you both did 2 and 2 and you laced them. You didn't even do like 2 one way, then 2 another way. You did 1A, 2A, 1B, 2B.
I wasn't. I mean, like I feel like I was kind of doing a similar thing. I was just sort of like I knew that I understood it, so I just sort of did whatever came to me.
Like I didn't know this concept.
Watch me do backflips with it now.
But I think it might also it might also just be there's like something in our psyche that's telling us to like do that like we're naturally geared to want to do it differently.
Mhm.
So because of that, we'll often say things in orders that aren't necessarily the most common, but still make perfect sense.
And design helps in that you kind of like just like, I know this works. Like funny is I explained to you guys what you did, but you didn't know you were doing it. But it was actually very sound logic. You wanted to show off and make it more complicated, but you didn't want to get the math wrong. So not even thinking about it, you just mathematically correctly figured the most complicated way of saying that concept, which is actually doing 4 in sequence.
I mean, I wasn't, if I was doing that, I wasn't doing it like consciously. I wasn't like thinking like this is what I want to do. I think I just naturally did that, you know.
It felt good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really feel like you're like juggling at that point. You're like, oh, so I got that, I got that, I got that. I think I got this. I don't think I got this though. Then you like throw that ball in the air.
And just Ben, you're right. There's part like, you know, say, you know, showing what you can do. But also there's the angle maybe you're referring to more the way you felt it is similar that you are owning the concept. They're like, I really understand it. And when you do it that way, sometimes you'll just kind of pick like a complicated way of rendering your principle to show you really know the principle well.
I get this. I have that a similar experience when I'm in class. Like ask like so many questions during like a class period that I'm almost like dialoguing with the professor. But the questions I'm asking are usually like things that are basically on the edge or the border of what like the teacher is covering. They're usually things that like the teacher isn't really considering in their lesson, but are interesting to me. Like I want to know about them, you know? So like it'll usually be something advanced or something that's like, it's relevant, but it's not like directly covered in the material. So, oftentimes I'll ask questions that are more unique and a little bit more interesting than what's being discussed. It's
I had an experience a little bit with my sociology teacher. He said he's kind of a little bit old school in a certain sense, and he used the term QT, and I was like, what does that mean? And then he was like, oh yeah, on the quiet, right? Because he was talking about like how people try to keep things under wraps or something, and he used that term QT. Then I was like, oh, I use the term DL. And then he was like, oh, what's that? Oh, down low. And I was like, yeah, down low. And then, you know, it was kind of an interesting kind of moment. I blushed a little bit afterwards because I was like, you know, the entire classroom was sort of like, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, DL, I use that. You know, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah. I really felt like old school versus new school at that point.
But it was one school.
yeah. It means the same thing, basically. All right.
That definitely comes up with the hunters. Old school, new school, it's one school. Natural law. All right. I forget who went last there. Was that you, Ben?
Ben.
Ben went last. Okay, so you'll go first this next,
I think so too.
Which is perception versus discernment lead.
All right, perception, discernment lead. That's me? I'm going first, right?
Who went last?
I think I went last, so that means I should go first next. So.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Okay. So the perception lead, discernment lead, TETs refer to the 8 mojos that have the same energy field in the perception lead, discernment lead dichotomy. So the perception lead mojos are the Naiji, Vaiji, Nizi, Vizi, Nijai, Nizai, Vijai, Vizai. And those all have perception power as their what?
No, go ahead. You got it.
Oh yeah, and all of them have a perception power as their source power. The discernment lead mojos are the Zinai, Jinai, Zivai, Jivai, Zaini, Zivi, Jaini, Jivi. Discernment lead or discernment power as their source power.
Good. Glenn?
All right, so for the next one up is perception lead versus discernment lead. So this is another octet, and this has all mojos that either have a energy field which favors being perception lead versus being discernment lead. So depending on, also all the perception mojos are going to have, or perception lead mojos are going to have a perception power as their source power, followed by a discernment power as their tandem, versus the discernment lead mojos, which are going to have a source power being discernment and then a tandem power being perception. So for the perception lead mojos, this would include the Naiji, the Naizi, the Nijai, the Nizai, the Vaiji, the Vaizi, the Vizhai, and the Vizai. For the discernment lead mojos, this would include the Jaini, the Jaivi, the Zaini, the Zaivi, the Zinai, the Zivai, and the Jinai and the Jivai.
Good. All right, you'll go first. This next one, which is
Interpretive and literal.
Indeed.
I was gonna ask a question, Coach. I know that like the Naiji is like the yinist of the yang, and the Nijai is like, I think the fourth. It's like the fourth yinist or the fourth yangist of the yin.
Yinist of the adaptives. Or no, that's not true, right?
I think it's the fourth yangist of the yin, if that makes sense. The Nijai.
No,
because
the Nijai is actually quite yin, I think, because of its powers being both.
But it's the
yinist of the gatherers.
Yeah.
Right, but I know that it's also adaptive, and it's also because the way it works is you have the four pilots, and then you have the four hunters, and then you have the four gatherers, and then you have the four towers as far as the yang yin spectrum. Is that right, or am I?
It does. I mean, I guess I didn't quite call it that way, but yeah, you could look at it that way. I think. Let me say, because it's basically going in the order of dichotomies. So most important is directive adaptive.
Yeah, directive adaptive. Then you have after that. Yeah. So, if you group multiple mojos and you consider the 5 energetic dichotomies, can you also rank the yinness or the yang and yinness and the yangness of that relationship or of that grouping?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
So, for example, you can. So, if that is the case, I believe the Nijez is the yinnest of the 8 inspirational pairings, if I'm not mistaken. Despite the fact that the individual mojos are, like the Naiji is like basically in the middle. It's the yinnest of the yang, and the Nijai is more like 3/4 down.
Well, not really.
So I don't know. I thought that.
They're both, the Naiji is the yinnest of the directive. And any storyline is going to have a directive, so it's within the context of it being a directive. So within the context of being a directive, it's the yinnest. And then within the context of being a gatherer, Nijai would probably be second. Jaini would probably be first.
Yeah, the Jaini is
But the Jaini isn't a gatherer.
I mean,
right.
Jaini as the what do you call it? I think
that just more to the point. If you're saying that it's a gatherer, then the same thing, that it would be the yinnest of the gatherers.
Right, but what I'm saying is you can rank all of the mojos in terms of overall yinness and yinness versus yangness. So
Correct.
if you were to do so, you would have the 4 pilots ranked from like Zivai to Jinai. Then you would have the 4 hunters ranked from Vaizi to Naiji.
Well, I wasn't planning on getting this right now, but let me just do it real quick so I can see what we're talking about here. But it would go Naiji first, then would be Naizi, right?
From yinness to yangness, right?
Right.
For the hunters.
Vaiji, then Vaizi. I'm not sure how this would work.
Yeah, Z is
from my understanding, the Zivai is the yangest of the directives.
You know, I don't really have this
And
right now because I'm thinking that I'm not sure if I want to go directly in that order. I need to figure it out, but I will look into this. I will. This kind of got to kind of scribble down the paper, and
because I think I've done the math correctly in saying that the Zivai is the yangest of all the mojos, and that
yes, it is. Zivai,
the Naiji is about halfway across if you're ranking all of the mojos because it's the yinnest of the directives.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So it's as far as the ranking, it's virtually in the middle, not exactly in the middle because there's an even number.
Yeah, there's four qualities that either can be yang or yin, which is subjective, objective, adaptive, directive, values-based, logic-based, and And then
the
there's
reason
also
the reason why
literal versus interpretive. Yeah.
the reason why I say I think the Nijez is the yinnest of the inspirational relationships is because it's perception lead. If it were discernment lead, it wouldn't be, I think, because that's the third after you've already considered objective, subjective, and directive adaptive. Because in every inspirational relationship, you have one adaptive and one directive, you have one objective and one subjective. But the next difference is in the perception lead or discernment lead. That there's actually a difference between.
Ben, if you don't mind me asking, I'm just where I don't mind talking this more another time as well because it's interesting. But what is it that this is about?
Oh, there's nothing it's about. I was just interested.
Okay, so you were just wondering if there's a system that
I'm interested in the mathematics of when you start combining mojos in terms of like yin and yang.
Right. I just want you to know that I have not gone through that math myself, and I'm leery of you taking away anything I'm saying right now is givens. For example, you made a statement at the end of they are that because they're a perception lead. I'm not sure if that's.
I don't understand exactly what that means myself.
Yeah, so I would like to know. I would like to have my head around the math that you're doing here.
The reason why is because
basically, I find this a very interesting conversation. But if you're asking for me to make any given statements or to agree to any kind of assertions, I am not okay doing that at this time. Does that make sense?
Okay, sure thing. Yeah.
But I find the topic very interesting, and I agree there is a hierarchy of the yang yin there. But I'd like to.
I think I'm right on this, but I mean.
No. I don't doubt that you are. I just literally don't understand enough of the conversation.
Yeah, I've also I've kind of looked into this myself a little bit, but I haven't actually like fleshed it all out as far as like looking at it all completely with everything, all the details laid out and everything. Although it is kind of like, that seems like it would be an interesting thing to want to try and do, is just to know like, so these are all. This is a spectrum of all the yin mojos to the most yang mojos, the most yin groupings, inspirational groupings to the most yang inspirational groupings, and tallying up their numbers and stuff like that seems like an interesting thing. But yeah, I think we should get back to the beat here.
Yeah.
Right. So interpretive mojos versus literal mojos. This is my beat, right, Coach?
Yes.
All right.
But Ben, I think a thread in this would be great. I'd actually like to work this out.
Sure, I could do that. It's a rather specific question. I know, like, if I were to go through like every possibility of like of ranking the mojos by yangs for yinness, when all of the considerations are made, it would take me forever. Like, there'd be like so many different ways you could do it, because this is just
I think there is actually just one way to do it. Yeah, I think there is.
I think actually there's a conversation. This sounds like a conversation that we could have on the.
There isn't. What I was referring to is there's multiple ways to do it, because if you're taking into different considerations, such as if you're ranking the inspirational pairings versus ranking, say the.
Well, if you're including more than one mojo, then yeah.
Say the Naz Alpha, for example, then it's complete different ranking. So, yeah, there's tons of ways you can rank them based on different considerations you're making.
Right.
If you have two different mojos, like you can make any combination with the 16 mojos, and that leaves you a completely different ranking, depending on what you're doing.
I'm a little lost in this conversation now, but I'll be honest with you. For my mind, I would kind of agree with Glenn there. I only know of one ranking, and then the storylines would also only have one ranking. But I could be mistaken. I don't know another way.
Right. But what I'm saying is, like, when you do Nijez, even though neither of the individual mojos are the yinnest, the Nijez is the yinnest of the inspiration.
The pairing, yeah.
Yep. So that's what I'm saying. If you combine mojos, the ranking, you're going to need to do the math all over again, basically. That makes sense.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understood that, but I really don't want to get more into that conversation anymore.
It seems like I'm coming from a position of really understanding of what I'm saying. There's a lot of depth to it, and you guys are having trouble wrapping your heads around.
I think
but it's
okay. Yeah,
it's something where it may need to be actually laid out clearly so it can be understood.
Yeah, I think you should probably just create a thread on that.
It's like when you do a math problem and you have an understanding of how it works, but in order to really explain it to somebody, you have to lay out precisely.
Exactly. So I think the best way to go about this is just to create a post.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Then have people, But anyways, all right. So the interpretive and literal octets. So the interpretive octet is basically, this has to do with the octets that favor having an interpretive power as one of their top two powers versus a literal mojos that have a literal power as one of their top two powers. So if you have the interpretive power, you're going to be part of the interpretive octet versus the literal if you have a literal power, then you're going to be part of the literal octet. So the interpretive octet includes the mojos of the Naiji, the Nijai, the Naizi, the Nizai, the Jinai, the Jaini, the Zinai, and the Nai, or the Zinai and the Zaini. For the literals octet, this would include the Vaiji, the Vijai, the Vizi, the Zvizai, the Zivai, the Zivi, the Zinai, no, the Jivai and the Jivi. There we go.
Got it. Ben?
Sure. So the literal interpretive octets refers to the 8 mojos that have the same energy field in the literal interpretive dichotomy. So the interpretive mojos are the Naiji, Nijai, Naizi, Nizai, Zaini, Jaini, Jinai, Zinai, and those have the interpret power is their top perception power. Then you have the literal mojos, which are the Zivai, Jivai, Vijai, Vizai, Zivi, Jivi, and Vaiji, Vizi. And all those mojos have a literal power as their top perception power.
Good. All right, you'll take lead in this next one, Ben. Logic-based, values-based.
Cool. So the logic-based, values-based octets refers to the 8 mojos that have the same energy field in the logic-based, values-based dichotomy. Those are the Naiji, Jinai, Jivai, Vaiji, Vijai, Jivi, Nijai, Jaini for the values-based. And each of those have a values-based power as their top discernment power. And then you have the logic-based mojos, which are the Zaini, Zivi, Nizai, Vizai, Naizi, Zinai, Vizi, Zivai. And all of those have a logic-based power as their top discernment power.
Boom. Glenn?
All right. Okay, so the next octet that we're going to be discussing here is the values-based versus the logic-based octet. Each one has 8. That's why it's called octet. And so the values-based octet includes all the mojos that have a values-based power as one of their top 2 powers versus the logic-based octet, which has a logic-based power as one of their top 2 powers. So the values-based octet includes the mojos of the Naiji, the Jinai, the Nijai, the Jaini, the Vaiji, the Vijai, and the Vaiji, Vijai, and then Jivai and the Jivi. For the logic-based octet, that will include all the mojos, which are the Naizi, the Nizai, the Zinai, the Zaini, the Zivi, the and then the Zinai and the Zaini.
Good. All right, Glenn, you go first on next, which is conscious perception power octets.
Okay. So okay, so they both have Ni, Vi, Naivi,
Exactly.
that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is an octet? Right, yeah, it is an octet, yeah. Because all mojos have either Ni or Vi. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'll either have Ni Vi or you'll have Ni V, one of the two.
Right, right. Okay, so the conscious perceptions octet includes all modules that have either Ni and Vi as their uh, as their as their perception powers, versus having Ni and V as their perception powers as their conscious powers. So for the Ni and V groupings or octet, that would include the Ni-Ji, the Ji-Ni, the Xi-V, the V-Xi, the Ni-Z, the Z-Ni, the Xi-V, and the V-Xi, right?
Yep.
And then for the Ni-Vi grouping or octet, that would include the Ni-Xi, the Xi-Ni, the Vi-Z, and the Z-Vi, as well as the Ni-Xi, the Xi-Ni, the Ji-Vi, and the Vi-Ji.
Good. Ben?
So we're doing the conscious perception powers?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so the conscious perception power octets refers to all of the mojos that have same conscious perception powers. So you have the Ni-Vi octets, which are the Ni-Xi, Ni-Xi, Xi-Ni, Xi-Ni, Vi-Ji, Vi-Z, Ji-Vi, Z-Vi. You have the Ni-V octets, which are the Ni-Ji, Ni-Z, Z-Ni, Ji-Ni, V-Xi, V-Xi, Xi-V, Xi-V.
Oh. All right, Ben, you go next. Same thing with the conscious discernment.
Cool. Okay, so the conscious discernment octets refers to the 8 mojos that have the same 2 conscious discernment powers. So you have the Xi-Ji octets, which are the Ji-Ni, Ji-Vi, Ni-Ji, Vi-Ji, Xi-Ni, Xi-V, Ni-Xi, V-Xi, and all of those have Xi and Ji consciously. And then you have the Z-Xi octets, which are the Z-Ni, Ni-Z, Z-Vi, Vi-Z, Xi-Ni, Xi-V, V-Xi, Ni-Xi, and all of those mojos have Xi and Z consciously.
Good. Glenn?
All right, so the next group octets would include the Ji and Xi users versus the Z and Xi users. So for the Ji and Xi users, this would include the Ni-Ji, the Ji-Ni, the Vi-Ji, the Vi-Xi, no, Vi-Ji and the Ji-Vi, I mean, and also the Xi-V, the V-Xi, and the Ni-Xi, and the Xi-Ni. For the Z and Xi octet, that would include the Ni-Z, the Z-Ni, the Xi-V, and the Xi-V and the V-Xi, as well as the what is it? The Vi-Z, the V-Xi, the Xi-V, no, the Xi-Ni, and the Ni-Xi.
All right. Tricky.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question basically is, I'm thinking about what to call these. We use them so often. I like to give them a name.
Z,
Okay.
Xi, and Xi-Z discerners?
This is my name for right now. I may alter this in the future, but I'm going with counterpart duo. So Ni-Ji and Vi-Ji, for example, the Jez Hunters, we are counterparts. We kind of fulfill a similar role, but different.
Yeah, that's cool. I know that wasn't named in the book, but we could probably
so that's what I'm going right now.
Counterpart
duo. All right, can you guys, who did last there? That was Glenn. Glenn, you go first. Basically, can you distinguish the 8 different counterpart duos? What they are?
Counterpart duos.
That's next section.
So are we required to say what the counterpart duo means?
Yeah, basically
say what that relationship is.
And who's in it.
Okay, just
Okay,
so I
makes
understand
sense.
what this is. What is this? Like it.
There's another grouping here. There's like two of them. It says some more social alchemy groups.
Oh, okay, okay, some more.
Right.
Okay.
From Jez Gatherer down to Vez Towers, that's basically 8 different duos. I'm calling those the counterpart duos.
All right, so this is getting into duos.
It's ones that aren't on the fundamental 20, but they're used so often I wanted to add them in. This one next set. So I'm calling these counterpart duos. Do you want Ben to go first?
So like Jez gatherers, for example?
Exactly.
Yep.
Basically saying what makes them Jez Gatherer and who are they.
Okay, all right. No, I think I can go first.
Okay.
It's really just like same source, except it's basically the same tandem. I mean, in terms of, I mean, that's how I often conceptualize it. But it's
Yeah,
also you know, the same within the priority quartet, for example. So
Yeah.
you'll never have counterparts that aren't pilots, for example, if they're the person's pilot.
all right. So the next grouping is going to include a duos grouping, which is called the, what did you say, Coach?
I'm calling counterpart duo for right now.
So the counterpart duos. This is similar to like the alphas, except instead of the source power being the defining factor and being the similarity between both the duos, it's going to be the tandem power. So this would include the Jez gatherers, the Jez pilots, not the Jez pilots. That would not make sense. The Jez hunters. So for example, the Jez gatherers would include the Nijai and the Vijai. The Jez hunters would include the Naiji and the Vaiji. The Zez gatherers would be the Nizai and the Vizai. The Zez hunters would be the Vizi and the Nizi. The the Nez towers or the Ni towers, or the Nez towers, that would include the Zaini and the Jaini. The Vez towers would be the Zai V and the Jai V. The Nez pilots would include the Zinai and the Jinai, and the Vez pilots would include the Jivai and the Zivai.
Correct. Ben?
Right. So the counterpart duos are the mojos that have different source powers, but the same tandem powers. So you have the Jez hunters, which are the Vaiji and the Naiji. They both have Ji as their tandem power. And then you have Zez hunters, which are Nizi and Vizi. You have Nez pilots, which are Zinai and Jinai. You have Vez pilots, which are, you have Vez pilots, which are Zivai and Jivai. You have Nez gatherers, which are Jaini and Zaini. You have Vez gatherers, which are Jaivi and Zaivi. You have Jez gatherers, which are Vijai and Nijai. And you have Zez gatherers, which are Vizai and Nizai.
Cool.
You could say Nez, or you could even say like the actual power, like Ni gatherers.
Yeah,
right?
you totally could.
Yeah.
Ni gatherers?
Like, just like we say like Ni alpha, you know?
Ni towers, you mean?
So,
Or Ni tandems.
Yeah, Ni tandems, Ni towers, yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, when the math is there, there's lots of different ways you can actually approach why it's that position. All right, so
V polars.
All right, so Ben, you went last there, so you want to go first?
Sure.
So I'm tentatively calling this.
Oh, just a point though. It wouldn't make sense to do the offsides and the polar powers, because that would just be redundant, I think, right? Because with the Ni alpha and the same tandems.
It's being obscurist. I mean, it's being obscure on purpose, but it is technically mathematically correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Just like you can actually call the Ni alpha the V polars. I don't know why.
It's like when you add two numbers together, like or it's like when you I don't know, like you add two numbers together and you're like, all right, 2 + 2 = 4. Well, technically, you could also do -2 plus -2 times -1, and it would give you the same result. You know, I don't know. So
Yeah.
All right. So Ben, I'm tentatively calling this one the the super special club.
all right, that's awesome. So it's like, okay, so it's we have it for.
It's like a duo that's within the special club, although it's also in other things too.
Interesting. So we have it for interpretive literal, like subjective interpretive is special club, right?
Right.
So this has to do with, this is when within the storylines, or within the
Well, basically, you know what? May I do it that way? It does. It actually combines. I think Glenn, you may have mentioned this. It's actually in two other groupings. It's in the special club and the storyline.
Yeah, it's storyline quartet, right? I'm not sure exactly what.
Let's call it story club. There we go. Like Fight Night. We're calling it story club. The
That's
story
cool.
club duo.
Yeah. Eventually, we're just gonna like come up with names with like every possible combination of two mojos.
Yeah, it's relevant to understanding the human condition. I'm for it. Let's call this.
Hey, every relationship's relevant, you know. It's like,
yeah, for sure. Do you call this story club? Story club duo for now.
Sure, that sounds good. All right, so you have, all right, so the story club duo is the two mojos that are in the same storyline, that is, you know, romantic, cerebrals, etc., and are also have the same energy field in the objective subjective dichotomy. So you have the subjective romantics, which are the Naiji and Jaini. You have the objective romantics, which are the Jinai and Nijai. You have the subjective cerebrals, which are the Naizi and Zaini. You have the objective cerebrals, which are the Nizai and Zinai. You have the subjective centralists, which are the Vaiji and Jaivi. You have the objective centralists, which are the Vijay and Jivai. You have the subjective practicals, which are the Vizi and Zivi. And you have the objective practicals, which are the Vizai and Zivi.
Bam. Glenn?
All right, so next we have the, what is it, the storyline, the story club groupings? Story club. All right, so this is another duo grouping which have the same, that fall in the same storylines, or romantics, cerebrals, sensualists, and practicals, but also have the same preference as far as their source power being either subjective or objective. So the first one we can say is the sub-ROMs, which includes the Naiji and the Jaini. Then we have the ob-ROMs, which is the Jinai and Nijai. Then we have the sub-sens, which is the Vaiji and the Jaivi. And then the ob-sens, which is the Jivai and the Vijay. Then there's the sub-ints, which includes the Naizi and the Zaini.
Actually, sub what?
Subserbs, never mind. Subserbs, which includes the Naizi and the Zaini, and then the obserbs, which includes the Zinai and the Nizai. And then the sub-prax, which includes the Vizi and Zivi, and the ob-prax, which includes the Zivi and the Vizai.
Good. All righty. So next up, Glenn, you go first here. What are personal storylines? How does this relate to human evolution? In what context are personal storylines often used by pod layer practitioners?
Finally, we're out of the maze. All right, so personal storylines refers to the heroic narrative that is naturally imbued into the human condition. As part of the inherited legacy of the human species, much of what it takes to be a heroic human that moves oneself and the rest of humanity forward is gifted to humans in their genetics, so they are able to do many of the things they need to without the environment telling them when or how. Although obviously a supportive environment is also helpful in the discovery process. The framework of personal storylines is often seen and used in Podler as a more artistic, character-driven, and quest-focused way of working with the Mojo phenomenon that merges synergistically with the other ways of working with the it, or it.
So,
All
take
right.
your time when you're ready.
I'm hearing some noises like cars.
No, Caroline just messaged me. Geese girl.
Right.
Cool.
She's doing some stuff.
Okay, you don't need to get into it, but yeah, all right. Dealing with some finger waving and then stuff.
No, I try to be as helpful as I can. I don't know how good I am.
Right. You got to do what you can as far as helping out other people. Nijai and Naiji and so on. All right. Personal story. I'm trying to understand, wrap my head around this. So the personal storylines is referring to, like, because when I first saw that, I was like, okay, we're talking about like the personal storyline. Like, for example, yours, coach, is like the Martian Manifesto. That's like what you've given it as a name, right?
No, that's actually my teaching story as part of my spirit.
Teaching story.
Yeah,
Okay.
but personal story refers to the fact that the 8 powers of psyche, you can think of humans as basically being 8 powers in a hierarchical order, but it feels more like you're a mojo, like you're a design, like you're a person. And
Right.
technically, you know what I mean, you're a person, you're a mojo, but really you're a story. Your 2 mojos combined, you and your other, and combined, what they actually make is a story. Do you mean that's how you know how to be an IG, for example? A lot of it's like natural. It's not just say ones and zeros. The ones and zeros add up to motifs. Like, you know, say Ben, the motif of wanting to ask a teacher a very kind of like insightful but slightly off-topic question to kind of show, you know what I mean, that you really paid attention, but want to go in like an interesting direction. That's motif Naiji have evolved to want to do a lot. So we will notice,
yeah, that makes sense.
We'll notice opportunities in the environment to do it. We'll naturally think of ideas of how to do it. And that's because we are a character in a story. So we're powers, but the powers add up to a character. The character is actually in a peak pathway story.
Right. And that also includes all of our unconscious processes as well as the spirit forms and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And so on. All right.
See right there in the kind of the curriculum, you're right. Without actually saying spirit forms, bringing the personal story is bringing in the idea of character and of basically motif. And obviously that goes nicely into spirit forming. But at this point, you can teach this without using that scary S word that makes people so nervous.
Spirituality?
Yeah, some people get nervous with that. You know what I mean? Talk about the degrees of Podler. So when you teach about it, some people are more comfortable with like, okay, what have you proven? You know, and so the mojo phenomenon is one we can actually talk like scientist to scientist with them. But as a part of science talk, we have spirituality, but we can not use that word, but all the principles we're talking about, like you just mentioned there, Glenn, it will naturally go right into spirit forming when that.
I feel like that's probably like the biggest barrier that people are going to have with us is like whenever we talk about spirituality, they think we're crazy. Like if you say anything, like if we describe ourselves as research project, that sounds very scientific and it's something that people generally have respect for. But as soon as you say that like we have like spiritual beliefs, like it sounds like we're like a cult or something, like to regular people.
Yeah.
So
actually, it goes 2 ways.
Yeah, actually, I think
the other way is, real quick, that's one way. It also goes reverse. Some people dig our spiritual vibe. They dig it. and they like that as their thing. But then when it gets to doing mojo reading and collaging and leveling up and work, you know, like science, like actual like application rigor, exactly, they freak out like, dude, you're ruining my buzz here. I'm like, no, I mean, we are science as well. I mean, you have to exert yourself and use proper practices. So yeah, it depends which way they come in. Very few people actually are strong on both. You guys always have been, but it's kind of a rare trait. Most people tend to be able to handle reality with one, but not the other.
I know that I've had to grow in both areas as I've gotten into pod there. I think maybe I was a little bit more scientifically minded, looking for that angle. But it was interesting because I wasn't as used to exerting myself in the same kind of way in which a scientist would normally do that. But I was exerting myself in another kind of way as well, but then also a little bit doing spirituality stuff as well. But for the most part, spirituality was something that I kind of associated with like religion. And then it took me a little bit to finally grasp that, no, you can have spirituality and have it make sense and not have it be some kind of like airy-fairy, theoretical kind of stuff that has no basis in reality. That's when I really came to the epiphany that, you know, when it comes to like music, for example, listening to music, that's a spiritual experience, right? That is everything actually is a kind of spiritual experience. When an artist paints something, that they're going through some kind of like a spiritual kind of awakening and growth as they paint the, what do you call it, on the canvas, or when a writer writes in a book. And that's a spiritual experience. And nobody, and the thing is, people they don't realize that these are spiritual things that are happening. But whenever you talk to them about spirituality, then they kind of like, they get a knee-jerk reaction to it. But they don't realize that they're doing spirituality all the time in their everyday life. Yeah, what were you gonna say, Coach?
No, but yeah, it's true. It's funny because if you come with science, I can get that. But if you also come from like more like the new agey group, and some new agey people like what we do as well, but then the science rigor freaks them out. So it's kind of funny what does it. I find though that mojo reading is really ideal for making you have to do both. Because, for example, like, you know what I mean, you'll have to train. You'll actually, I mean, you'll have to put hours in. You'll have to do like, you know, like rigor, scientific, you know, research rigor. But as you guys have done very well over the years with the mojo reading, it's also deeply personal and spiritual. If you don't confront your biases and things that you thought the way things work but don't, you know what I mean, all the kind of stuff that will affect your reads, you guys know you can't read well. If your spirit isn't on, if you're not getting your spirit on, it's hard to read well. It really is.
Yeah, you got to like do the detective work of like what's on me, what's happening with what's going on. But then at the same time, you kind of have to put hours on the mat. You got to be like, I got to get the work done. As far as like this needs to be done for today, and then this has to be done tomorrow. And getting those points on the board, that's also very important as well. And that can be like, oh, that's like a daunting weighted thing that needs to be done. But once you get it done, then it's sort of like it's relief, right? Then you can sort of like relax. There's no longer that pressure on your head.
And you'll hear like most scientists will say, for example, as far as doing that, there's a great comfort that comes from doing the work, knowing that you're trying to understand nature, and that afterwards you're like, okay, I will forever be smarter for having gone through that effort. It's kind of it's its own reward in a way that you're not the same person.
Yeah, you're constantly inch by inch, little by little, you're kind of growing, and you're making those adaptations and growth happen in that sense. And so yeah,
it seems that there's a like a spiritual tax in whenever you want to do something. So there's a certain amount of energy you need to be able to voice yourself. For example, that's something where if you're spiritually distracted, it's very hard to do that effectively. It's very hard to focus. So a lot of people, a lot of speakers, if there's something that's bothering them, they won't be on their game. Or in a sport, a lot of people will be like, you know, you might ask, you know, what's wrong, and they'll often be thinking about something. I'm, you know, not on. You know, I'm not up on my game today because there's something on my mind. Mojo reading, it's the same principle, but it's taken at a much higher level where they're more like where you need to summon yourself even more than you need to do for other things, where the slightest things that are bothering you make much more of a difference, I feel like. Yeah. So it definitely requires a higher level, I feel like, to be able to be the best that you can be.
What was the last thing you said? You didn't last.
Oh, it definitely seems to require a higher level, a higher spiritual confidence to be the best that you can be.
Yeah,
it seems.
absolutely, for sure. Okay, I don't want to go on too much here, but I do think we were talking about what you're asking about, Glenn. But to get back to that, long story short is this is basically saying that we're in the human design. We're talking about math, but the math adds up to a story.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see if I can just freeball this. Okay, so personal storylines. It has to do with basically like we are a certain mojo. Everyone is a mojo, and you can break it down into very sort of like each individual power, and you can think of yourself as a power, as powers being arranged in a certain kind of a way. But there is more to it in the sense that no one actually, I think, really thinks of themselves as individual powers all clumped up together. There is a sort of like a holistic kind of way holistic way in which one approaches their entire being, which is that they think of themselves as being, you know, like a hero in a story, as being with themselves consciously, and then also their other being a part of this kind of like story, which is a very personal story that includes them and, you know, whatever is going on with them in their daily day-to-day kind of living and the sort of adventures and activities that one goes on. And so there is definitely like a genetic, you know, basis to it, which is that, you know, you are, you know, like in terms of like your heredity and stuff like that, you are designed to be a certain way. There is, you know, certain coding that kind of like says that, you know, you are going to be structured in the kind of way that you are structured. But then as far as like the actual experiencing of it, that's going to be more organic. That's going to feel more natural. But having the mojo phenomenon and understanding that really helps to understand all the different things that are going on as far as like individually. But there's also a, there's much more to it in the sense that, you know, you're experiencing life in all kinds of ways, and your experiences then get, they get filtered through your peak pathway and stuff, and then that causes you to have the sort of experiences that you do. But you are still you in the sense. So, I mean, you are your mojo, but you're also you. You're the unique version of the mojo that you are, and the experiences and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you got it, though.
Cool.
Does that make sense? Ben?
Yeah, it makes sense. I hope I didn't go on too long there.
No, I think you got it all. You got it all. You brought in the genetic angle and what they basically are. And this thing, one last thing as far as just say that one more thing about that, how the practitioners like to use it, because sometimes it can be easier to understand how you're supposed to improve oneself or be better if you think of yourself as a character in a story. Sometimes going so deep into like the powers, whatever, it's like Glenn, improve your eye. That's a little
right.
What does that mean? What, you know, how do you even where do you start to do that? You kind of have to have like, oh, I'm going to be like a wizard tonight. And you think, what would a wizard do to get independence of mind? You kind of like get into a character, and then you do it, and then it just does what it's going to do.
Yeah, it's if you think too mathematically about how you approach something, if you try and break it down the pieces too much, it doesn't really work effectively. But if you expand it out into a motif, it's much easier to get yourself going. I think, especially as Naiji being, you know, on the most highest on the SS index,
for sure,
it very much so flows more naturally for us in general to think more motifs and spiritual dialogue. Oh, you were saying something?
No, that's basically it. I just want to. I think you're pretty much answering the question. You want to go ahead and just answer it for the credit there?
Oh, I didn't even know I was.
No, you got. I was like, I don't know if he knows this, but he's kind of answering the question.
All right. So personal storylines are naturally imbued into the human condition. Throughout all of our evolution, we have genetic material that plays a large part in contributing to our own personal story and what it means for us to be heroic and a hero. The world and the environment has a certain influence on us, and it can be taxing or rewarding depending on what the environment is doing. But we will always have an innate will to shine, innate drive to be a heroic human based on our evolution and our genetics. Personal storylines are very often used in pod layer theory as a means of understanding the human soul, and as a means of figuring out what it means to really be a high heroic human within the context of knowledge of the Moja phenomenon and all of the Podler teaches about spirituality. So within that newfound context, what it really means with this new knowledge of how we work and what it means to be a hero.
Nice. I like you both guys are like, I know sections require using the S word, but we're using the S word.
Totally.
Reset it. All right, nice. Okay, we only have like a couple minutes left here, so I'm thinking maybe this is a good place to pause.
Yeah.
Sure, I think that's sounds good.
Nice. All righty.
I was thinking like on the like the Yank. Oh yeah.